Focus, 4th of July 2023, Latin America, Communist China, and the New Space Race. Chinese space activities are solely beneficial to the Chinese, and they make their Latin American allies feel good. China's connections with Latin America and the Caribbean, LAC, have changed over the past 20 years, moving beyond their primarily extractive nature to include a rising emphasis on digital and space technology. Space was only briefly mentioned in the Chinese Communist Party's (CCP) first white paper on its ties with LAC, published in 2008. In addition to other areas of mutual interest, it stated that the Chinese side will strengthen cooperation with Latin America and the Caribbean in aeronautics and astronautics. China's involvement in the industry has increased 8 years later. It specifically addressed space cooperation in Section 9 of its 2016 policy document on LAC, the most recent to be published, focusing on aerospace infrastructure, satellite data applications, and remote sensing and communication satellites. Later, the CCP's Global Security Initiative, introduced in 2022 and described in February 2023, took up these topics. China's aim to rule near-Earth space is advanced by pursuing space cooperation with Latin America and the Caribbean. Additionally, it undermines Western and American-led alliances and institutions while fortifying connections with key regional allies. While some governments in the LAC region support Beijing's political objectives, others are motivated by the sector's economic advantages. This indicates that China-LAC space ties will probably continue to develop during the next years. The history of China's space cooperation has not been advantageous to anyone. The China-Brazil Earth Resources Satellite program was created in 1988, marking the beginning of China's first joint space project with the LAC area. The National Institute for Space Research of Brazil and the China Academy of Space Technology collaborated on PRS. Its stated purpose is to observe and keep an eye on the resources and environment of the Earth. It was established to build satellites and launch them into space jointly. The effort aimed to let the two nations increase their space presence independently of the US and other Western powers. There have been 6 PRS satellite launches, with the most recent being in 2019. Since 2002, each nation has contributed 50% of the costs. Before that, China had contributed 70%. The CCP has increased the scope of its space-based alliances across the LAC region, buoyed by its productive partnership with Brazil and its rivalry with the United States in the space race. China targets bilateral space cooperation. The populist totalitarian regimes that share China's ideology and frequently need financial help but cannot receive it from the West have seen China's most significant advancements in bilateral space cooperation with LAC states. Argentina and Beijing inked a framework agreement for space cooperation in 2004, shortly after Argentina's financial crisis in 2003. The deal, which was made between China's National Space Agency and Argentina's National Space Activities Commission, was about using China's Long March rockets to launch Argentine satellites from the country's then recently founded Argentina's Satellite Solutions Company. In this way, it also prepared the way for constructing the Espacio Lejano station in the Patagonian province of Neuquén. The station, with its 35-meter-long antenna in operations overseen by the People's Liberation Army Strategic Support Forces China Satellite Launch and Tracking Control General Bureau, continues to be a mystery. It appears to be a dual-use facility for Chinese civilian and military objectives. President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner and Chinese President Xi Jinping agreed to it in 2014, and it became operational in late 2017. Some observers say it may have been connected to the Chinese spy balloon that entered American airspace earlier this year. Yet this cannot be verified without openness and Argentine scrutiny. Beijing's first deep space Earth station outside the Chinese mainland is this $500 million installation, a member of the Chinese Deep Space Network. It is intended to ease communication between spacecraft that travel over the southern hemisphere in deep space missions. According to Chinese official media, it played an important role in the Change 4 mission's 2019 landing on the Moon's far side. It is essential to China's aspirations to advance multi-objective tracking, telemetry, and command capabilities, MTTC, which would enable better coordinated communication in challenging missions and its study on Mars. The PLA's awareness, navigation, and placement on the battlefield would all benefit from improved MTTC capabilities. Bolivia, Chile, Ecuador, and Venezuela are among the countries with which China has developed bilateral space relations. Providing Chinese launch services, satellite parts, and platforms has been the focal point of all cooperation. Most funding has come from loans obtained through the China Development Bank. These tools have allowed LAC nations to monitor their agricultural production and use of natural resources, including for export to China. Additionally, it has allowed them to collect geographical data and enhance communications, which could help with border surveillance and other national security problems. Beijing's bilateral space cooperation with LAC countries is a part of the Belt and Road Initiative's (BRI) Space Information Corridor, which aims to improve data sharing and space-related cooperation among BRI members by deploying satellites, ground stations, and other ground application systems, as well as training foreign space personnel. LAC nations with space agreements with China are hubs in Beijing's larger space network, which is being developed to compete with and eventually supersede its US-led rival. China funds regional projects aimed at undermining the United States. The Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, CELAC, is officially supported by China's Global Security Initiative, GSI, in playing an active role in upholding regional peace and security. Beijing has made clear since 2011 that it prefers to cooperate with the LAC region through CELAC, despite the bloc's lack of institutional frameworks for dealing with security or space-related issues. The Organization of American States, OAS, the region's established framework for multilateral participation, suffers due to China's backing for CELAC. The United States is a member of the OAS but not of CELAC. China intentionally prefers to create new frameworks for collaboration over utilizing existing ones. This includes space as well. Developing a China-CELAC Space Cooperation Forum is suggested in the 2022 to 2024 China-CELAC Joint Action Plan. Participants would cooperate on satellite technology, remote sensing, and research through this forum. The plan also mentions Beijing's intention to use the BRI to expand its Beidou satellite network across the region to compete with the global positioning system run by the United States. The Latin American and Caribbean Space Agency, ALCE, with its headquarters in Mexico, was founded in 2021 with the help of Mexico and Argentina. The ALCE, which now has 23 members, Brazil has not joined, aims to promote regional cooperation on space-related projects, including creating satellite technologies specific to the LAC region. But it's unclear what the program will be able to do with a $100 million first budget. The ALCE has received open support from China. Although no formal agreements have been reached, Beijing supports the agency financially and technologically, which cannot be ignored. Members of ALCE include nations with which Beijing already has bilateral space relations and countries favor closer ties. China's participation in the ALCE would increase its space footprint in Latin America and encourage LAC nations to participate in their multilateral space programs. China's global space projects include LAC countries. In recent years, Beijing has launched new formal and informal multilateral efforts to compete with its current counterparts' policy objectives. Several of these are space-related. They are more crucial than ever to CCP policy, especially its interactions with LAC states. For instance, the Joint China-CELAC Plan calls for CELAC nations to join the International Lunar Research Station, ILRS, which is being built with Russia. Venezuela indicated in April that it would like to do so as soon as possible. China National Space Administration has inked cooperation agreements or letters of intent with Argentina, Brazil, and the Asia-Pacific Space Cooperation Organization, of which Peru is a member since it published its initial roadmap for the ILRS in 2021. Brazil's involvement in the ILRS is notable since it may make it more difficult to sign on to the Artemis Accords, which are led by the United States and to which Mexico and Colombia have already committed. Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, president of Brazil, has publicly stated his desire to forge better connections with Beijing to balance world geopolitics. In April, Beijing announced the International Lunar Research Station Cooperation Organization, ILRSCO. The ILRSCO is to be established as a formal organization with leadership and bureaucracy, which are expected to come from China, unlike the Artemis Accords, a non-binding international agreement. The ILRSCO will undertake lunar missions in conjunction with member states through agreements on principles and subsequent planning directed by Beijing. Its development could result in lunar administration with two systems. Participation in the ILRSCO and other Chinese-led space efforts may give LAC nations access to resources and space-based infrastructure for navigation, location, and communication. It also has the added benefit of extending and normalizing Chinese global control, which is advantageous for those who share Beijing's goal of a multilateral world order. The Asia-Pacific Space Cooperation Organization, APSCO, based in Beijing, was established with this goal as its foundation in 2005. Mexico is an observer state, while Peru is a founder member. The founding statement of APSCO states, "Experience shows that during the Cold War years, space policies of superpowers rested on rivalry, claiming hegemony in space." In its convention, collaboration is outlined in Article 6 regarding Earth observation, space law, research, and a central data bank. Several of these undertakings include Peru. It has taken part in training related to APSCO's data sharing service platform, hosts a space observation site for tracking trash in low Earth orbit, and is a member of the joint Small Multi-Mission Satellites Constellation program with China, Turkey, and Pakistan. Peru's participation in APSCO, like other LAC countries in Chinese international space projects, shows that the LAC region's space geography is changing, and its members are becoming more invested in it outside of the more straightforward bilateral contacts. Member states of LAC are taking a more active role in space geopolitics, encouraged by Beijing. Through bilateral and international channels, particularly among the region's left-leaning governments, the trajectory of Sino-LAC space collaboration seems set to accelerate. Regional space activities in the LAC region are probably too young to be taken seriously. As Beijing looks for strategic international partners to forward its agenda, it will continue to pursue this strengthening of space relations forcefully. Such ties might ultimately go in the way of LAC countries working with the US in space. It is more likely that the US will view the adoption of the Beidou system, ground stations like Espacio Lejano, and data sharing agreements with Beijing as risks to national security. While certain LAC nations could welcome a purported move away from the United States, it would present technological and diplomatic obstacles for others. Under President Lula, Brazil is a nation to watch in this situation. A space situational awareness sharing agreement between Brazil and the US is in place and makes it easier to share information on space objects. For instance, this and other US space programming might be scaled back if Brazil accepts the ILRSCO. Therefore, space policy is evolving for Brazil, and the moderate LAC states into a delicate balancing act between existing and emerging entities. It seems doubtful that China and the United States will end their space collaboration because of the financial and technological benefits. China is evolving into a more capable and multifaceted space actor capable of influencing norms in space and amongst nations as it expands its space cooperation in the LAC region. Its involvement in the area supports member nations as credible space actors. This will contribute to the increasingly antagonistic, multipolar, and confusing space geopolitics that China is promoting for the West.